Okay, I'm also recording. And are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. For Paul and your wife, we have been doing this book of Hebrews for quite some time, January this year. So we have reached to part 14. We are going very slow. Just want to let you know. Okay, let's do a recap of what we studied in the last presentation. We learned that heavenly Jerusalem, which is also known as Zion, was our mother and also is our mother. This is a spiritual mother we have, and she is our instructor. She instructs us in wisdom and understanding. We went through Proverbs, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th chapters. And in fact, the whole book of Proverbs, until the last chapter, it has much to say about this mother. And she instructs us in the wisdom and understanding, and also provides us discernment and discretion through the knowledge of God. And she's faithful to our Father, and she faithfully teaches what Father wants us to be instructed. And she instructs us via agencies of teachership, Jesus and his apostles primarily, and any other teacher that Jesus leads. As long as Jesus leads, that teacher can also be part of this mother who instructs us in wisdom and understanding. And we discussed that a teacher, once teaching the truth, does not mean always teaches truth. And teacher has to be watchful, as well as the listeners have to be watchful that the truth is not compromised. And this mother, she feeds us with spiritual milk and spiritual meat as we grow. When we are like young Christians, just came into the faith and truth, you can't teach them heavy doctrines, deeper things. You have to start with milk. And as the baby grows, she transitions milk to the solid food. That is true in the physical realm of a physical mother. It is also true of the spiritual mother. And you cannot feed, meat cannot go before the milk. Everybody has to go through this milk and then transition and grow and mature and get ready for spiritual meat. And this is one of the central topics we would be discussing as Hebrews writer takes this analogy and admonishes us and encourages us to go to meat. And the other points we discussed, she gives long life to those who honor and obey her. In fact, Proverbs boldly calls her tree of life, the tree of life. And if we despise and reject her instruction, it leads to death, spiritual death. And last point, let us not stay with milk, even though we began our journey with milk, but grow with her meat unto maturity. So meat has to come from her as well as milk. Today, I'm planning to discuss one verse, Hebrews 5:14. But the strong meat belongs to them that are of full age. That is, you have grown and ready past the milk age. Even those, by reason of use, have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. Here it's a very loaded statement. We would try to analyze this, and we also see the things that are being said by Hebrews writer. We need to discern both good as well as evil. Why we need to discern? They are not apparent on surface. the definitions are also not apparent on surface. When you read the scriptures, you have to go to the deeper layers and levels, and then you begin to understand what is right and what is wrong, or what is good and what is evil, or what is righteousness and what is sin. So you have to discern. And then after learning the definitions, then you are put through fire and put through different circumstances, and where the devil, world, and flesh, as they surround you, you are challenged in different ways, on different fronts. So you have to discern the situations, you have to discern the enemy. So the discernment of both good and evil takes many forms, many battle fronts, many shapes, and many aspects of your faith. And then once you are doing this for a while, and maybe perhaps for many months and many years, and using your senses, that is your faculty of your mind, faculties, and you are exercising them by reason of use. So you have passed through these circumstances so many times, so you are perfected, you are being built. And when these things are happening, the Hebrews writer tells that you are of full age and the solid meat belongs to you. The whole verse. So, brethren, for this to happen, we have to understand the law of God, which is the foundation for this verse. The law, I mean, the whole law, all the instructions of God, we have to understand. Now, the law comes in different forms and shapes when you come to new covenant. In the old covenant, we have just rules. If you take 10 commandments, there are just 10 rules. Each rule is completely specified. The application, the extent, the scope, and what to do and what not to do. It is a full, complete instruction. That is how the 10 commandments were given. But when you come to new covenant, everything is not black and white. You need this verse. This verse really comes to home when you come to new covenant, as we will shortly see. When we come to law, it always reminds us of the commandments of God. There are lots of commandments under old covenant and hugely more commandments under new covenant. And I asked several people in the churches of God for many years across the country, and even the international sites. When I go to Feast of Tabernacles, what are the commandments more important to you? What are the chief or important commandments? And I think it would not surprise you, as I was not surprised. These are the things I found. This is almost universal. Very few people are exception to this, but most people say the first important thing is Sabbath, and then holidays, then clean and unclean meats, and tithing. And some more people would say, not forsaking, assembling together. And some people, like, it's not be fruitful and multiply. I heard this from few ministers. In fact, Dr. Donald Ward one time told me personally that in the old worldwide days, they surveyed the congregations of the worldwide, and I don't know how they did that, which commandment was best obeyed. So in that survey, they found the most obeyed commandment, or the best obeyed commandment in the churches of God, is do not eat pork. I was very surprised. I thought it was always Sabbath, because we insisted so much. And then Dr. Wards went on and said the second best obeyed commandment was be fruitful and multiply. I was totally kind of taken aback. Like, I wish their results were wrong, because we confess and advocate and profess the Sabbath and holy days. I thought the order should be like this, but their survey has proved something different. Anyways, this is where most of us are in the churches of God. And by the grace given to me as a teacher, I want to take you as well as myself beyond these basics. I would consider them milk, and milk comprises of other things also than this listing. As Hebrews writer encourages us to go to meat, strong meat, I also want you and myself go to strong meat. Let's go and read this verse 14 again in the context. Let me start from verse 12. For the time ye ought to be teachers. So Hebrews writer expects all of us to be teachers. And this is a true statement. We teach either from a pulpit or not. We teach by our example. We teach by our words. We teach by our actions and reactions. We teach. We teach in so many ways. But he expects us to be knowledgeable about the word of God, and we should be teachers. But unfortunately, his audience nearly 2000 years ago, when this epistle was written, they were not yet ready to be teachers. Ye have need that one teach you again, which be the first principles of the oracles of God. So he's saying you have to be taught again the basics, the first principles of the oracles of God, and are become such as have need of milk, not of strong meat. That is the kind of complaint that Hebrews writer is introducing. Verse 13, for everyone that uses milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe, a child, an infant. So he is not skillful with the word of righteousness. And here, verse 14, but the strong meat belongs to them that are of full age, even those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. So you have to discern, you have to understand, you have to exercise your mental faculties, and by reason of use, you would grow and attain this full age because of the strong meat. Let's see how the law is the foundation for this verse, the law. Now, the law is, you can draw a line, horizontal line like this, and call it as a law. Law is a standard. It's a set of standards and set of definitions. And law defines sin. When you violate a law, it is called sin by God. So I would write sin underneath it. And very familiar and popular scripture that we know, John defines the sin as transgression of the law. Whosoever commits sin transgresses also the law, for the sin is the transgression of the law. So when you violate, transgress the law, you are committing sin. So law defines sin. That is the primary function of the law. But there is another hidden function of the law, that is, the law also defines righteousness. So the law, if you are fulfilling or obeying or conforming to this standard, you are automatically fall into this bucket where you are called righteous. And whenever you violate this law, this standard, you are in sin, or you miss the mark, then you are in sin. This is true for any law, even in the civil government law. If you violate the law, you are under the penalty of crime. And if you are conforming to the civil law, then you are a good citizen. So the good and evil, right and wrong. So God's law also goes in this direction, but it goes much more. So the law defines both sin and righteousness. And then we have gone through this diagram several times by now. We have the old covenant. In the old covenant, there is physical kingdom of Egypt, and physical Pharaoh was heading that, and along with his taskmasters, they have put the physical Israelites under slavery, under the hard taskmasters of Egypt and the Pharaoh. The Israelites were suffering, and they cried out to the Yahweh, their God. And then God sends Moses, a man called Moses, and he comes there and faces Pharaoh face to face and confronts him, and then delivers the physical Israel from this physical kingdom of Egypt, and with miracles, signs, and wonders from God. And Moses takes them through the Red Sea, where they were baptized under the cloud in the waters into Moses. Acts chapter 10. And then they come to a place called Mount Sinai, where the children of Israel enter into covenant with Yahweh, Moses being the mediator, and this is called Sinai covenant. The covenant has the terms and conditions and the parties. The parties here are Yahweh on one side and the children of Israel on the other side, and Moses being mediator. And the terms and conditions are 10 commandments primarily, and there are other ordinances Moses writes in a book, and then they enter into the covenant. Once the covenant is agreed, it is kind of contract. The whole covenant and the terms and conditions were ratified by the blood of bulls and blood of goats. So Moses sprinkles on all the books and the tablets and on the children, and the whole thing is sealed. So the covenant, once it is sealed, you cannot change the terms and conditions. It is binding by both parties. That's how the covenant works. And then they walk through the physical wilderness for 40 long years, and then they reach the promised land. And this covenant has the benefits or blessings from God when the conditions are obeyed or met. And there are also penalties from God to the people if they disobey the covenant, if they are not faithful to the covenant. So they become covenanted people. They walk through that and they enjoy the promised land for a while. And then once they have problems with keeping the covenantal conditions, and they are gone out from this promised land. That's what we see. So coming back to here in the green side, this is the labeled in green, this is new covenant. The new covenant is whole spiritual from one end to the other. You have a similar replication, first physical and then spiritual. And there is a spiritual Egypt, and the Pharaoh's equivalent is Satan, and you have spiritual Israel. The spiritual Israel is under bondage to spiritual Egypt, which is kingdom of devil and kingdom of Satan. And spiritual Pharaoh is Satan. And then God sends not Moses, but Jesus to deliver this Israel. So Jesus comes and confronts Satan face to face and delivers Israel, and then takes them through the figurative sea. And here people were baptized into Moses, and here the spiritual Israelites were baptized into Jesus. And here, one big group was led by Moses. Here, there is no one big batch. This is individual and personal. The people are redeemed throughout the ages, and they come and follow this path. And then they come to another mountain called Mount Sion or Zion. And then the covenant is between the spiritual children of Israel and Jesus Christ, Yahweh. And uh, and primarily Jesus as mediator, and the Father is on the top. It is implied. There are two covenants actually. There is a one covenant between Father and Jesus Christ, and then the new covenant, which we come to call it as between Jesus and us. These two covenants work hand in hand, and Jesus is both the parties to the covenant as well as mediator for the other covenant. So we enter into this covenant both with Jesus and the Father, and Jesus brings the law. Here, just like Moses brought the law on two tablets of stone, the Ten Commandments, Jesus brings the law, but there are no two stones, because he writes the law on the tablets of our heart and inscribe them in our inward parts, as we studied in the previous presentations. Once the covenant is agreed, and the Jesus brings this law in the form of his teachings. When he came to earth for 3.5 years, he teaches all that Father has given him. Those teachings would be the terms and conditions of the new covenant. And then he goes to cross and sheds his blood, and he seals the covenant. So nothing can be added or removed from the covenant, and both the parties would be binding to this covenant, which kind of allegorically relates to our baptism. And then we go through the spiritual wilderness for 40 long years. These are metaphorical years until we die, or until Jesus Christ returns. Then we would be in the kingdom of God, which is also New Jerusalem. In New Jerusalem, we are in the presence of the Father and presence of our Lord Jesus Christ, and where Father would dwell with us and wipe out every tear from our eyes. This is beautiful, wonderful thing. That is the promise of the Father. This is the plus point. This is the benefits of this covenant. And the negative or penalties for this covenant is eternal death in the lake of fire. So the blessings are huge, and the penalties are huge, but this is the covenant. And we also discussed that when Jesus came and introduced this new covenant, he also ended the old covenant. This is no longer offered by God. In fact, salvation and the eternal life was not offered under this covenant. Only the physical land that is flowing with milk and honey. Now, Hebrews writer encourages us to come to the new covenant, which is based on better promises. So when Jesus brings the law is spiritual. The whole thing is spiritual. The law also to be spiritual. Let us see more about this law. The law under two covenants, I have a table of comparison. Under the old covenant, the law was physical, and the new covenant is spiritual. What I mean by spiritual is it is deeper inside a person. It affects his heart, his mind, and other inward spiritual components a person has. We are a physical being, a flesh being, but we have two important spiritual components that are our heart and our mind. So this law affects us inside. And the old covenant 10 commandments, especially, the law was external to the person. And here it is internal. First, changes occur internally and they reflect outwardly. And then the old covenant, there are basically rules. A rule specifies everything: how to obey, what to obey, the extent, scope, depth, everything is predefined. And whether you obey or not, that is what your responsibility. But here, under the new covenant, the law comes in many more flavors. They are not just rules. There are very few rules, in fact, that we will discuss and with examples shortly. And Old Covenant law is very basic, very, very, very basic. And here, when you come to New Covenant, law expands exponentially. And when we say law expands exponentially, I say the law, when we say law, it also expands the righteousness and sin. The three concepts are very tightly tied together. Whenever we discuss law, we should discuss righteousness as well as sin that the law defines. All three concepts go hand in hand. And there is an important terminology. Apostle Paul and other apostles, as well as Hebrews writer, would use this terminology in New Testament scriptures. We should be familiar with, with these two terms. There is one term called righteousness by law. This is referring to the righteousness by under Old Covenant. And righteousness of God is a term used to the righteousness under New Covenant. There are two righteousnesses, righteousness by law and righteousness of God. Now, the question may be asked, how about this righteousness? Is that not from God? Yes, it is. Some people say this law was given by Moses. In a way that is true, but it is not totally true. The law actually came from Yahweh, God, and Moses was just an instrument, is a mediator. So this law also came from God, and that law also defined the righteousness. But you have to somehow distinguish the two righteousnesses. So that's how the Bible uses this terminology. Whenever it says righteousness by law, it is referring to 10 commandments and Old Covenant righteousness. And here it is referring to righteousness under New Covenant. Here, Romans 7 says, under the New Covenant, we know that the law is spiritual. So this is the first point. Until such time, before the arrival of New Covenant, law was physical mostly, and now it is spiritual. And Romans 3:21, entire book of Romans, I hope to make this point and elaborate it further when we come to Romans, book of Romans. But let me read chapter 3, verse 21. But now the righteousness of God, this is the terminology, righteousness of God, without or outside the law is manifested. Here, the meaning of the law is Old Covenant. Outside of the Old Covenant, a new righteousness, that which is righteousness of God, is introduced, manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets. So the law and the prophets, law is first 5 books, and the prophets are all the prophets, Old Testament prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, minor prophets, major prophets. They all witnessed or prophesied that this new righteousness is going to come with the new covenant. And verse 22, he elaborates, even the righteousness of God, that is again here, right hand side, which is by faith of Jesus Christ. So it comes to us via Jesus Christ, and it starts with our faith in Son of God, and unto all and upon all them that believe. So this is just an introduction. So there are two righteousnesses. I know people would be surprised that there are two righteousnesses, but Bible is clear, especially book of Romans. And let's go further. Why I am going to this righteousness is not black and white, where you can decide. You need discernment, you need understanding, you need to learn the application, you need, the whole thing needs work on your part. Let us see the Old Covenant 10 commandments, what I mean by physical and external. Let's take the first commandment, Exodus 20 verse 2. I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. So this is a physical land of Egypt. Yahweh brought them out and out of the house of bondage to Pharaoh and his taskmasters. Now you have come into the freedom, and God says, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." When they came out from Egypt, they have a choice of whole host of gods worshipped by pagans around them. They have Baal, they have groves, they have Astaroth, they have female gods, they have goddesses and male gods, and they have huge array of gods before them. And thou shalt have no other gods, and only worship me, the Yahweh. So they have the physical gods they should not worship, and they should be faithful to their covenant and only Yahweh. So that's a commandment. It's not very complex. When we come to new covenant, it gets a lot more complex. Now, Exodus 20 verse 16, this is a commandment against lying. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. So it's not even addressing all forms and shapes and shades of lying. It is just false witness against thy neighbor. So don't go against your neighbor and do the lying, false witnessing against thy neighbor. Uh, that is very simple, straightforward covenant, and your responsibility is to your neighbor, physical neighbor, perhaps, and then just be in good terms and don't defraud him. Don't bear false witness against him. This is a very basic commandment, and this is quite physical in the sense your neighbor and yourself, and it is very clear the scope. The last commandment, the 10th commandment, here God goes extra mile to describe the whole covenant, to give the full scope of the covenant. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. He gives the list: neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. It is just limited to your neighbor, and he gives the listing, and these listings are external to you, and you shall not covet or possess or take them to yourself. So these are external to the person, and they are basically physical in the nature, physical things, uh, if you want to say, and it's very rule based. It's a rule. The whole thing is defined for you. The whole challenge for you is to conform and obey that rule or not. It's pretty straightforward. And and when we come to new covenant, things are not like this simple. That's what I'm going to. Let's see how Jesus brought the law. This is not something suddenly happened under New Testament. The Old Testament scriptures, as we just read, the law and the prophets witnessed that this new righteousness and the new law Jesus would bring. Let us quickly see just three prophecies. Actually, there are tons of prophecies around this subject. Genesis 49:10. Genesis 49:10, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, the tribe of Judah, from which Jesus Christ would come, and he would rule with a scepter of righteousness and with a rod of iron. So the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet. Between his feet is a figure of speech. That means one of the descendants of tribe of Judah would accomplish this, fulfill the prophecy, until Shiloh come. The word Shiloh is a derivative of shalom, or peace. Now, Jesus Christ's titles are Prince of Peace and also is King of Salem, King of Peace, and King of Righteousness shall come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. So this is a great prophecy that Jesus Christ, the new lawgiver, would come eventually in future. So this is how the law and the prophets have witnessed this new righteousness that is going to come. Let's go to Micah 4, Micah chapter 4, verse 2. And many nations shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord and to the house of God of Jacob. And he, here again, implied is Jesus Christ. He will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For the law shall go forth out of Zion. Remember, Zion is a symbol of the new covenant, Sion or Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. This is New Jerusalem. This is heavenly Jerusalem. This is our mother, Jerusalem. So the word of the Lord would come from our mother and shall go forth out of Zion under new covenant. Let's see Deuteronomy 18, verse 18. This is profound. This is so profound. I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren. This is yet future. Right in Deuteronomy, God is saying that he will raise up a prophet. Actually, it is the prophet, as we understand later, from among the brethren, like unto thee. That means he's talking to Moses. Similar to Moses, a person would be raised from the brethren, and I will put, that is, God will put, I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak unto them all that I shall command him. Here, Father is putting his words in his Son, who is the prophet, and it shall come to pass that whosoever will not hearken unto my words, which he shall speak in my name, I will require it of him. That means it is not negotiable. Whatever this prophet, the prophet, we understand that as Jesus Christ, whatever he teaches, it is binding. God requires us, and any violation would ultimately, eventually lead to death in lake of fire, the second death. So this is pretty profound, as God prophesied thousands of years, hundreds of years ago about the messianic prophecy that he will bring this new righteousness, new law, and new instructions from the Father. So, law under new covenant, Jesus Christ is the lawgiver, we just now discussed, and his teachings are the terms and conditions of the new covenant. And here, under the new covenant, the law comes in different flavors. They are not just thou shall and thou shall not. If you take 10 commandments, the whole wording is thou shall do these things, those things, or thou shall not do these things or those things or these things. Shall or shall not is more like a direct commandment. It's a rule based. Here it comes in different flavors. It comes true under the new covenant. They come as commandments, but they take a form of simple instructions, and sometimes admonitions, like Pharisees or other sinful, ungodly men were admonished. They are not just for Pharisees. It is for us. We have to learn and understand the commandments and law and the instructions from the admonitions. And also it comes as principles and concepts and parables and stories. Now, these parables and stories are very difficult. You don't know what is being said, what is being instructed. You have to study and you have to understand and you have to infer the commandment, the teaching, the instruction from these parables and stories. Same with principles and concepts. There is a learning aspect and then there is an application aspect. And when you're applying the things that you learned, you have to grow in discretion and discernment and wisdom and understanding. And the whole lot of demands are put on you for this type of instructions, because they are all spiritual commandments. And then finally, the law comes through the demonstration of Jesus Christ through his acts and reacts, how he acted in every situation and how he reacted to people. This is profound as you study the life of Jesus Christ for those 3.5 years. He not only teaches by his words, but he demonstrates by living the God's law. Now, there are few aspects I just want to throw light on the under the new covenant. Righteousness is not just a list of commandments, just like we have 10 commandments. The righteousness is comprises of the person, teachings, and examples of Jesus Christ. In fact, there are scriptures that tell us that he is the righteousness of God manifested for us. He is sum total, encompasses all truth and all righteousness for us. And righteousness begins with faith in him. That's how we begin our learning. And righteousness unfolds itself as you study, learn, and live. His words, if you study, they have their own navigational things. It directs itself to what are more important, what are lesser important, and it builds. And his words actually have more deeper layers than the first appears. It takes years of study, and as you learn, as you obey, you grow more. You begin with very small, and you grow and grow as time progresses. And righteousness is progressively revealed to those who are seeking the righteousness. This is very important. He says, seek and knock and ask. So you have your part, and then he begins to respond to your prayers and seeking, and he gives more of the truth, more of the righteousness. And he also introduces the weightier matters of law and lighter matters of the law. So when he says weightier, these are the most important aspects of the law, and implying that the others are lighter in the sense. And he also defines sins. Sins, there are more serious sins and less serious sins. Sins unto death and sins not unto death. And as you begin this process and work with God and walk with him in faith, you would grow. And this is my personal observation. Visible growth is noticed in multiples of 5 years, like 5, 10, 15, 20 years. It's a long process of time where you see yourself growing and maturing. And God also comes and shows you when you reach a milestone. It's an amazing thing. Like God tells you, like, you are like this several years ago. Now you have reached to this point. He shows you. It's a beautiful working and walking together with God and the believer. Now come to this stack. Now 10 commandments are our rules, like Sabbath, holidays, tithing, and some of the clean, unclean meats. They don't need much thinking, just other than just be careful to obey them. Here it needs more thinking under the new covenant. I just want to introduce the stack. We will come back to stack in future presentations. The whole thing starts with knowledge of God. My people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. You need knowledge, but you don't stay there. Yeah, yes, sir. Any question?
His problem, there's a mic that's live and creating noise. I went out and came back. I'm going to turn it off. Okay.
Okay, you can mute them. Okay. So with knowledge, you grow in understanding. You have to add understanding. You understand the verses that are written, and instructions, once you understand, you begin to discern. There are deeper things you are understanding, and to the discernment you add discretion. For every situation you have to use discretion based on the three elements, and then you grow in wisdom. You become comfortable applying the knowledge that are given to you, and then you practice good works. That means you keep applying whenever there is an opportunity comes. And then when you do these things, God promises that he will give you proper fear of God. This fear of God is greatly enhances you, and it leads to conviction deep inside you, within your heart and your mind, and makes changes the person who you are and what you are deep inside you. And you begin to live the truth. And once you live the truth, you begin to bear good fruit. Let me take a small example. Say the commandment about lying. Thou shalt not bear false witness, or under the new covenant, all the shades of lying are covered. Lying. Now, the knowledge is given that you shall not tell the lie, but speak the truth at all times. So you have to speak the truth and understand what is truth and what is not truth. And then you have to discern in this situation what I am saying is the truth or not. Am I really doing and obeying the commandment or not? You have to discern the scope and depth of this commandment. And then you have to use discretion for every possible situation. You don't have this discretion on the day one. As the days, months, years progress, you learn this discretion to handle every situation. Then you would be wise as you have more experience. And then good works. That means every time you tell truth, it is a good work. And every time you slip back and tell a lie, especially when you are put on spot, you tell a lie, then that is a bad work. So you would be doing some good works and some bad works in the beginning. But as the things repeat, more good works would be there and fewer bad works. And once you grow in greater good works, God would add this dimension, fear of God, and then conviction. And once the conviction is there, you begin to tell the truth all the time. You desire, but sometimes you fall back and tell lies. But the direction is the you want to speak truth. And at this point, what happens is you begin to bear the fruit, good fruit. Jesus says every good tree bears good fruit. Every bad tree bears bad fruit. That means it's something naturally done. A good tree naturally bears good fruit. So at this point, the, the speaking truth has become part of you, and you are telling truth naturally because it became part of your nature. That means that particular aspect of truth God has written deep inside your heart and in your mind. They are like kind of inscribed, just like on the two tablets of stone. He wrote the commandments with his finger, burning the stone, part of the stone. Just like that, our physical, not the physical heart, it's a spiritual component and spiritual mind or inward parts. He would write them so that we naturally speak truth, even under temptation, even when you are put on spot and you have reached this stage. Now, from this stage, we come to this, and once you reach this state, God will give you more knowledge, more truths, and you repeat the same process, grow to good fruit, and then He will keep giving more knowledge. Sometimes you will increase quantitatively. You have more truths and more knowledge of Jesus Christ, or sometimes it is a qualitative growth. The same truths that you learned, you refine your understanding, your depth of the knowledge, that grows qualitatively. So the same thing, the whole this arrow repeats for either the same set of truths or the newer truths, both quantitative and qualitative. That's how the whole challenge of under the new covenant. You hardly have thou shall and thou shall not, the words spoken by Jesus Christ. They come with all flavors. It takes lots of time to study and learn. And one more thing I want to add here, you can help the other brothers and sisters in this layer. You can share the knowledge and lesser of understanding, and discernment and discretion is more private to the person. And if you grow in discernment and discretion, not necessarily you can teach these things to the others. They have to follow this path, and they have to grow in their own discretion and discernment, in their wisdom. And then once you come to the top of the stack, it's impossible to transfer this to the other persons, your brothers and sisters. However goodwill and good wish you have, these are like private to the person upper the stack. But the lower the stack, somehow you can help the brethren. But each person has to grow in this individually. There is no one batch mass of people. It's individual and personal. That's why salvation is so personal. Let's go further, the commandments of Jesus, just to give a flavor of what he says and how the commandments would come by him. Matthew 23:23, he said, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. So he's addressing the subject hypocrisy. For ye pay the tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of law. Here he does not begin the statement, says, these are the weightier matters of the law. He does not. It's all embedded and hidden. You have to study and think and meditate. Here he introduces, there are weightier matters of law, which Pharisees are not focusing. They are focusing on trivial things, tithing of mint, anise, and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of law. And here he says three things. These are the weightier matters of law. What is weightier? They carry more weight. They are more important. They are first in God's mind when it comes to righteousness or sin or the law. Here he says judgment, mercy, and faith. Now, this is not something I am coming up with. This is Jesus' words, directly his words, which his Father has put them in his mouth. And Father requires us under the new covenant. What is judgment and what is mercy and what is faith? Now, if you go to dictionary, they give some meaning. That does not really help. You have to study all the teachings of Jesus Christ and try to understand what is judgment. If you carefully study just this word judgment, how he uses, and it is always with justice, the justice and judgment, and then mercy, and then faith. And there is another verse, he adds love to it. So there are four weightier matters according to him, and these ought ye to have done, not leave the others undone. That doesn't mean the lighter aspects of the law you can just ignore and close your eyes. No, but he prioritizes. God has, that's how the law unfolds itself, the whole righteousness, if you carefully study his words. And ye blind guides, which strain a gnat is a small fly, you are trying to strain this gnat from a juice or something, and swallow a camel. So bigger things. Camel is weightier matters, and then you're trying to do trivial matters. That's what according to Jesus. And here he says hypocrites. He is defining hypocrisy. Wherever he talks about hypocrisy, whatever you understood from these verses should apply there also. That's how scripture explains scripture, and it unfolds itself. Verse 25, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees. I know many people, many Christians would take this verse, oh, he's yelling at scribes and Pharisees. We can skip this verse. You cannot. You cannot. Even though the admonition is going to scribes and Pharisees, it is for all of us who are under new covenant. We have to study these words. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye make clean the outside of the cup and platter, but within they are full of extortion and excess. Thou blind Pharisee, cleanse first that which is within the cup and platter, and the outside of them may be clean also. Now, he is not talking about physical cup and physical platter, physical washing. He's using a metaphor. You begin to understand the metaphors and figures of speech. Then you understand he's asking, cleanse your heart and mind and inward parts first, and then automatically outward righteousness would come. But if you just produce outward righteousness just for the people to see, you are more pitiable person. You are a hypocrite. And it is totally useless to convince people that you are righteous. People are sinful people, and what they think of you does not matter at all in the long run. What God thinks about you is actually what matters. So you have to be right with God. And God says he looks at your heart straight inside. He's interested what happens inside you. That's where you have to correct. And once you correct inside, automatically the outside gets right. You don't need to manage outside righteousness. That's what we said, like the new covenant righteousness is inward first, then outward, internal first, and then externals. And here he says, verse 27, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye are like men like unto whited sepulchres. This is like graveyard, your tomb, whitewashed, or like beautifully painted, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones. So you have to understand the phrase, and of all uncleanness. Now, to understand this, it takes lots of time, many months, maybe years, what he meant by uncleanness, what he meant by dead man's bones. Even so, ye also outwardly appear righteous unto men, but within ye are full of hypocrisy and iniquity. So he's addressing inside and outside. And this is the verse, the weightier matters. He adds love of God also to the list. Let's go further. And he talks about his commandments. Like here, interestingly, he tells his commandments. His commandments, like the old covenant 10 commandment keeping, you know what happened at Mount Sinai. People did not want to have face-to-face relationship with God. They were terrified with the quaking of the mountain and the thick darkness and lightnings and the thunder. Everybody was shivering. Even Moses was trembling. And they said, like, Moses, you go and speak to God and bring message to us. You be mediator. We will listen to you. You speak to God, and you speak to God on our behalf, and come and speak to us on God's behalf. That's how Moses became a mediator. There is no direct relationship. There is an indirect relationship with God under old covenant. And there was kind of disconnected obedience, right? You take the commandments of God and you keep them, you get the blessings, and you don't sin or break the commandments so that you would not get curses. That is kind of paradigm under the old covenant. Under the new covenant, you have direct relationship with God. Even Jesus Christ was God, is God, and Father is also God. So you're directly dealing with God, right? Now, Jesus Christ is the righteousness for us. And Luke 6, verse 47, very interesting things he says. Whosoever comes to me and hears my sayings and doeth them. So you have to come to Jesus first. How do you go to Jesus Christ? That's a big question. You cannot physically go to him. He is a spirit being, glorious spirit being, sitting on the right hand side of the Father in heaven. You can't go to him. This has to be spiritual. You have to spiritually go to him and hear his spiritual sayings and do them. If you're doing these three things, I will show you whom he is like. He is liking that man who built the house and dig deep and laid the foundation upon a rock. Rock is Jesus Christ. And when the floods arose, this is the devil, dragon releases flood after the woman. So the floods would come and streams beat vehemently upon that house. You are attacked day in and day out spiritually and could not shake it. You are not shaken. Why? Because you are founded upon the rock. You did first three things. Your rock. He explains all the negative. If you don't do that, your house would fall, you would fall. And these are beautiful things. It demands lots of time and lots of study, lots of meditation, lots of thinking, right? This is not just thou shall and thou shall not. And here he also affirms what the Deuteronomy said. He that rejects me, we are in John 12, verse 48. He that rejects me and receives not my words has one that judges him. The word that I have spoken, the same shall judge him in the last day. So we were judged according to what he spoke. For I have not spoken of myself, but the Father which sent me, he gave me a commandment, what I should say and what I should speak. This is what Deuteronomy said. In that prophet, the prophet, I will put my words in his mouth, and thou shalt surely hear. I will require of it. I just listed all the take heeds. Some of these commandments start with take heed, take heed. These are fascinating. We don't go through with all of them. For the sake of time, I want to read one thing. I want to go read one in the list. Luke 11, verse 35. This is of interesting thing. He says, take heed therefore that the light which is in you, which is in thee, be not darkness. This is a shocker. He says, take heed that the light that is in you is not darkness. What does that mean? It needs lots of efforts, lots of study, just to begin the first layer of what he is saying. It is like his words are like onion, right? If you take an onion, a woman takes an onion in a kitchen, she peels off the first layer, then another layer is hidden behind the first layer. And if you peel off that second layer, yet there is a third layer beneath it, hidden. His words are like that. There are more layers to his words. There are more deepness and depth. And we will excavate some of the layers as much as grace given to us. I would like to explore them, but that is what. Let's come back to the verse we started. But the strong meat belongs to them that are of full age, even those who, by the reason of use, have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. So nothing is straightforward. This is good and this is evil. You have to study, you have to learn, you have to exercise. This is where Hebrews writer taking us. If we want to grow beyond the milk, we have to study Jesus Christ's words and understand and discern and grow up the stack. He's indirectly referring to the stack. And then if you go to Greek, but the strong meat The word strong means firm, immovable, rigid, and steadfast. If you want to be strong, all these words, the strong meat belongs to them that are of full age, even those by reason of use. Reason of use can be translated power acquired by practice. You don't have this in the day one. It is progressively acquired by practice and have their senses exercised. The senses, the Greek word means perceiving, understanding, and judging. All these things you are exercising to discern, that is, to distinguish both good and evil. The good covers beautiful, excellent, commendable, noble in the sight of God, the whole range of meanings. And the word evil also covers pernicious, troublesome, injurious, and destructive. All those things you begin to understand, you begin to discern, and with the discernment, godly discernment, and godly men and women would avoid the paths of evil. They would discern the spirits and the demons. They will discern the men and women around them. They discern the matters, what is really behind the matters, whether they are leading to evil or leading to good. This is where the Hebrews writer takes us. Points to take home: seek Jesus Christ, the real one, because there are competing fake Jesuses. Jesus Christ's teachings are the terms and conditions of new covenant, and take time to study his teachings, understand them, and live them. You would be in the kingdom. That brings me to the end of my presentation. I will give the control back to.
Well done.